Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more turkey patterning, and today we've definitely got a very interesting shell and choke combo to try out, and I really don't know how it's going to perform. This choke seems to be a pretty solid performer, and from what I can remember, these shells are surprisingly decent for what they are, so maybe putting the two of them together might give us a really solid looking pattern. But as for the shell I brought here today, I don't have the box for it, and I recently found it in the cabinet when I was reorganizing the ammo shelves, so big thank you to BG for sending this over. I thought I had tested all your shells, but I guess I missed one of them. But that shell is this guy. This is a Remington Premier Hevi-Shot high velocity turkey load. It's a 3.5 inch, 1 3/4 ounce load of Hevi-Shot number 5, and I believe the box claim on these was 1225. I'll put a picture of the box over here if I can find one for it, but from what I understand, these were kind of a mid 2000s type of thing when Hevi-Shot was really starting to get a little bit more popular, and Remington wanted to kind of partner up with them and make a shell and stuff like that. So it's a Remington shell with Hevi-Shot stuff in it, and these, from what I can remember in last year's test with them, were some decently solid performers considering it's a Remington / Hevi-Shot shell. So we've got a 3.5 inch Hevi-Shot 5, but what can it do through today's choke combo? And as for today's setup, I brought out my Mossberg 835 Ulti-Mag, but as for the choke, I threw in this guy, which is the Primos Jellyhead Maximum. It's a 690 constriction, so very standard, kind of middle of the road constriction for an 835 turkey choke, since these are overbored to a 10 gauge bore size. But what can it do with these Hevi-Shot Remington Premier shells? If those are a solid performing shell, kind of like what I remember them being, then this should be a pretty decent patterning combination, but we'll see what we can get. But as for today's test, everything is set up the same as usual. I've got the turkey paper at 40 yards and the chronograph so we can get our velocity from the shells. So let's get you guys a view of that target and see what these older Remington Premier Hevi-Shot 3.5 inch 5s can give us through the 835 and the Jellyhead 690. I don't know what we're going to see. Could be good, could be disappointing, but let's take our shot and see what kind of pattern we get. Alright, so that shell gave us 1354 through the chrono. If that box claim of 1225 is actually correct for these shells, then we're definitely getting up and moving out pretty quick there. So yeah, 1354 for a Hevi-Shot 5 is more than enough velocity. But were we pushing them too fast? And how did they perform down there at 40 yards? Let's go check it out and see what we got. Alright, so here's our 40-yard target, and this is what we got. And yeah, we absolutely have a dead bird there all day long. There's a bunch of them through the brain and several more down the spine, so yeah, you would have absolutely gotten that turkey. And there is nowhere that he can move left or right on that turkey paper there and get away from you, so you do have some leeway to work with there as well. And looking at the pattern as a whole here, that's a solid performance. Remember, these are a Remington shell with Hevi-Shot stuff in it as kind of a partnership deal. Neither of those companies have really produced any outstanding turkey loads, in my opinion. They're always typically good enough, but rarely are they anything that's actually impressive. But this combo right here is a very solid performer. You have a nice hot core, even though it's not super overly tight or anything like that. It's a pretty even spread throughout most of it there. It does give you some leeway to work with without having pellets just scattered all over the place. And you really don't have a ton of flyers. Maybe there's a couple around the very outskirt edges, like down there at the bottom and stuff, but really not bad. Maybe around the very outskirt edges up here at the top there are some voids and stuff, but that really doesn't affect the pattern throughout the main majority of it there. So really, that is a decent performance there. I would actually turkey hunt with that combination just the way it is. I like the leeway it gives you, and you still have plenty enough pellets right through that middle 10 to 12 inches or so to where if you misjudge a distance or something to 45 yards or whatever the case might be, you're still going to have more than a capable enough pattern. So kind of like I thought I remembered, these seem to be a pretty decent performing shell. And we got to remember, this was the mid 2000s, say anywhere from 2005 to 2012 time frame. Back then you had the tail endings of the Winchester Supreme shells going to the XX version then and stuff like that, with Hevi-Shot just really trying to make a name for themselves in the market and so on. That would have been a very competitive shell at the time, and still today today, there's expensive shells on the store shelf that perform worse than that. Even the Remington Nitro turkeys and Premier turkeys and stuff like that are worse than that combo is right there. So that is a very solid performance in my opinion for what the shells are. Seems like that would be a very usable, very viable turkey hunt pattern at 40 yards through that Jellyhead 690 all day long. So maybe a little bit of sporadic stuff around the edges, but that's not bad, and it's more than a capable enough pattern. So Remington or Hevi-Shot, why can't you guys just make these shells again? And with the technology today, you could probably refine them even a little bit more than that. I don't know, seems like a pretty decent performing combination to me that's better than a lot of stuff you're putting out today. So I don't know, I guess you guys can let me know what you think about it, but that's a pretty solid pattern for what the shell is, I would say. Not a whole lot to complain about there for what it is. And here's the wad out of that shell, and these are a 5-petal variety, which is not something you see very often, at least not anymore in turkey shells. Typically, they're either 3 or 4 petals, so this does look a little funny compared to a lot of stuff today. Either way, nothing stuck down in there, no major damage or anything. We might have had one petal over here open a little farther than the rest, but that's not anything too out of the ordinary here. So the wad looks perfectly fine today, nothing out of the ordinary or nothing that I think we should really take too much note of here. Alright y'all, well, what did you think about that performance right there? That's a very solid, perfectly usable turkey pattern all day long. Out to 40 or 45 yards, that is more than capable of getting the job done. I like how even the central 10 to 12 inches of that pattern is. Around the edges, we might have a little bit of splotchiness, but nothing terrible. So that pattern would give you a little bit of leeway to work with in at a little bit closer ranges as well. So not bad at all, especially considering that this is both a Remington / a Hevi-Shot type of shell. Like I mentioned a minute ago, neither of those companies really produces anything today that I would call super impressive. They tend to just make shells that are good enough, but nothing outstanding. And that right there is probably better than any pattern we've ever gotten from any of the Remington Premier shells or Nitro shells or anything like that. So these seem to have been a pretty decent shell for the time period they were from. Definitely not a whole lot to complain about. I would absolutely use that on a turkey hunt any day of the week. But leave your thoughts down in the comments. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of these older Remington Premier Hevi-Shot type of shells? And if so, what kind of results have you seen from them? Is that a good enough pattern that you would hunt with it the way it is? Or do you still prefer today's much higher performance type of TSS stuff? And what other shells do you want to see us run through that 835 and Jellyhead combo? Let me know all that down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.